And now on to our next guest, a very good friend of mine, a fellow futurist, a globetrotter, and he is also Swedish, but don't hold that against him. Anders Sörman-Nilsson, welcome to CR Live this afternoon.
Great to be here, creating the future with you today, Chris.
And look, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you are also, so you're Swedish, Australian, you spend your life with your beautiful little family, split between those two parts of the world. And Sweden keeps hitting the headlines at the moment when it comes to COVID-19 and some of the numbers and the stats. And let's face it, you and I, as futurists, are always about trends and patterns and stats. And Sweden isn't hitting the note for all the good reasons, in my view, and we were chatting about this yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's become very, very clear is that this Swedish kind of approach of what we culturally term lagom, which is an old Viking saying. In fact, it came from the use of beer around the table and the good old Viking days. If you just drank enough beer and then passed it on to your mate and it lasted around the table, that was lagom, or around the team. The Swedish approach to most things tends to be very sort of balanced and even and not extreme in any way. And they're trying to tread a very careful sort of middle path where things are not really closed, but they're also not really open at the moment. And that is a huge challenge for the population and for businesses.
But really, Anders, how successful? I mean, you've got a really good position on this, because apart from having your parents still over there in Sweden, they're business owners, which we'll come back to in a second. I mean, how successful have you really seen this going for them? Because I'll be honest, I don't see how this has been going particularly well for Sweden so far.
Well, I'm part of the Swedish diaspora that doesn't live in Sweden anymore. I mean, I certainly visit there and spend a lot of time over there, at least pre-quarantine and pre-COVID. But it hasn't been successful at all. And sadly, many Swedes still have their heads in the sand and are very much just following government guidelines, which hasn't really, led to any real results. I mean, Sweden is still at the top of many of the tables of the worst way of managing COVID. Their results are still, in the exponential sort of knee of the curve or beyond the knee of the curve. Examples of deaths and infections. Their way of testing and tracing has also been very, very controversial. And at the same time as they're sort of saying that they want to keep livelihoods alive, businesses alive, they're doing very, very little to actually back that from a government support perspective. Whereas we in Australia can be, I think, very, very proud in terms of what the government has been offering to small businesses and large businesses alike. So Sweden is failing to protect both lives and livelihoods. For many, many days in the last fortnight, Sweden's been at the top of the table of deaths per capita, which is very, very worrying. And of course, when the data is there, as you point out, as futurists, we can be human-centric and strategy-centric because we're also very, very data-centric. And the Swedish government and the Health Institute has been failing to really switch strategy when the evidence is clearly against the fact that it's not working. Now, they're telling us to take a more long-term, long-range view of this. And saying that maybe when the second wave hits in other countries around the world, well, that's when the jury truly comes back in. But in the meantime, the Swedish story is not looking good.
And I mean, Anders, you and I are always looking for trends that kind of show us where we're going to be going over the next few years. I think it's safe to say that we're all in this phase now where we're trying to look at very much the immediacy of what's going on and what even the next few months look like. With the let's be honest, the slightly disastrous approach to what we're seeing with Sweden there. What's the impact been from that on a business level? How have we seen businesses and the economy being impacted? Because if you believe everything you read in the media, you would think that everything's going as normal and business is great and everyone's moving about their daily lives in Sweden as normal. Is that a reality, or is there something different going on?
No, that's not the reality. And I was interviewed on in Wall Street Journal just the other week about this, and sadly about a very a business case that's very close to my enduringly analog emotional heart, and it's the sad tale of my parents' 104-year-old third generation menswear retail store going under and going into voluntary administration as a result of all of the uncertainty. So what you see in most newspapers, or in the media, at least you were in the initial stages of Sweden's sort of revolutionary approach, was young people out drinking beers in the spring sunshine. But the story that wasn't being told is that anybody over 60 really was just taking matters into their own hands and staying at home. And for my parents, that was disastrous, because the major part of their customer demographic is a baby boomer. And so those people were already quarantined without being forced into quarantine, which meant that any business that sort of skewed towards baby boomers had a really, really rough time. So the story is really that neither livelihoods or lives are being saved at the moment. And if you compare it with the Australian approach of grants, of paykeeper, of investment, or focus on construction, of help with buses, etc., for all types of businesses, we are far ahead of where Sweden is. And even the economic indicators are such that, compared to other Scandinavian countries that did have a firm lockdown, Sweden's GDP decrease will be in line with those. And in terms of unemployment, again, unemployment will be the same as the rest of the Eurozone. So it is troublesome. And of course, when it comes to Sweden's tourism season this summer, it's also going to be impacted, because it's now on the list, the only country on the list of tourists from Germany, where you have to sit in quarantine for a week after returning from a Swedish holiday if you dare go there.
Yeah, you and I have been chatting about this yesterday, and Sweden is going to continue to be a big topic when we're looking at countries and how they've been responding to COVID-19. I think there's no doubt at all this side of the world, Australia so far at least, and New Zealand as well, have certainly been leading the pack, and let's hope that continues. We've also seen, though, over the last week or so, the chief health officer from Sweden acknowledge, at least in part, that if he'd had the time again to do this, there are things that he would have done differently. What do you think, if we look at the bigger picture, Sweden and Europe, what do you think we're going to see them do now differently if we had to try and make some predictions? And I realize that's a cruel question to ask to any futurist at the moment, to try and make a prediction with what's going on. But I get to be the futurist and the hobby epidemiologist at the same time. It's really hard to tell. I mean, I do think that the people responsible for this in Sweden have got to step up and take responsibility. I would like to see the person, Anders Tegnell, as his name is, resign and own the failure that this strategy has entailed. At the moment, there's been no talk of that. I also would like to see Swedes really taking this up and voting with their feet in the next election, because also the Social Democratic government has been following religiously the advice from someone who's been, responsible for many deaths that could have been prevented. And so that's my firm view. I mean, Britain did change tack. They were following a similar strategy to what Sweden has been deploying in a more flexible, more agile manner. Now, things have been fairly disastrous in the UK as well. But when they saw the data, at least they changed tack. And we haven't seen that from Sweden quite yet. But again, if the proof might be in the pudding, the jury is still out. We're going to see what happens in countries that are now starting to suffer from a second wave, like South Korea, Iran, etc. As the world opens up. That is still an unknown, but certainly happy to at the moment call Australia home. Living on an island has never been better, and you see similar results in Iceland and New Zealand, for example. Being an island in this particular instance, even though we're all digitally interconnected these days,
being on an analog island certainly helps from stopping viruses.
I think there's also no doubt at all that England did change strategy. Exactly as you said, the question I've always had was Sweden didn't really seem to have one. And I think I don't want to continue on with Sweden too much here because there's lots of other stuff for us to talk about. But the other one I want to talk is you and I are plumbed into all sorts of businesses all year long. We're always trying to, again, explore the patterns that are going on. And I think there's one resounding theme that's coming out again and again for me and for you over the last few months, which is businesses are now very much accelerating their digital and technology plans much quicker than they were necessarily intending on doing. I had a chat with the founders of Australia's biggest paint company, Hames Paint, the other week, and they were telling me exactly this, that they were accelerating their digital strategy. They've been very much an offline business. They're now suddenly pulled everything very much quicker to go into this new online world. What kind of patterns are you seeing there as well, Anders, in that? And how do you think that's going to play out for us as futurists for the rest of this year and also for our clients?
Well, there's a couple of things here. Satya Nadella from Microsoft, and they're one of our clients. He said recently that really because of COVID-19, my apologies, what you've seen is really, the compression of 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. But I would hazard a guess and actually say that it's a decade's worth of change, of leadership challenges, of digital disruption and digital transformation that has been, yes, converged, but into a single year, and that year is 2020. Now, some people want to cancel 2020. I don't think that that's the right way to go about things, but I do think is a great way for us at the moment to unlearn, relearn, and learn some new stuff about our businesses, be those big or small. And I just alluded before to the case of my parents' menswear store in Stockholm, Sweden. I've grown up with retail, so retail is really, in my blood, and my mum has been my toughest. She's been my toughest pro bono client for many, many years. We were driving very much a digital transformation strategy for her, really from the early days of when digital disruption started hitting us, 10, 15 years ago. And I think that digital disruption, and in many ways, was a sort of a future signal to all of us that it was time to wake up. It was a dress rehearsal in many ways for what was to come. And COVID-19 has been the burning platform for transformation. And and I know that as futurists or as science fiction storytellers, that it can be really, really difficult to sell change and really lead people into a place in the future through great strategy where people really buy into that with hearts and minds. And now we really have the burning platform for that change. And so there's a couple of reports we've just released, one together with Microsoft on the future of artificial intelligence in retail and how AI can in fact help with retail resilience. And another report from ING that we just co-authored the other month as well, which is called Future Focus, which really focuses on the future of jobs. And I think this is the heartening part of this. It's that technology is stepping up to actually provide hope for humanity and for us to flip our cognitive thinking, to retool, to upskill, and find the jobs that are emerging in what I term the second renaissance. Pandemics have a history of leading to workforce mobility and labor shifts and even investments in technology. And this is what we're seeing right now. And if you're not on your toes and learning and unlearning and relearning a few things this year, you've really missed an opportunity.
It is sad to hear, obviously, about your family story there of your business, because I know that's been a big part of your narrative that you use even in your keynotes, which you talk this story about analog to digital, and it was a big part in your books as well. I'm sure something extraordinary will come out of it. I mean, through all of these chaotic times, we see some great things come out, and I have no doubt the same will apply there for you. I want you to leave us with one final thought, Anders. I normally ask this question when I'm interviewing clients because I get some really great answers. If you have one hope for the future, post-pandemic, when we come out of whatever this is, and whatever the end looks like, let's assume we'll know what the end is when we get there. When we're into this new beginning, this new era, post-COVID-19, what's your hope for the future?
Well, my hope for the future is really that we're going to see a creative renaissance, a second renaissance, or the flourishing of human innovation and creativity. Pre-COVID, we all had to do really menial styles of work. Even at the top echelons of the banking world, top bankers would be spending up to 30% of their day doing data entry, for example. Menial styles of work that really we should be outsourcing to robots. I do believe that with COVID, while we've been hibernating, machines have kept learning. Yeah. And I do believe that by actually outsourcing more and more of the cognitive grunt work, data entry, pattern recognition, crunching the numbers, etc., punching Excel spreadsheets, right? A lot of this menial work will be done by robots so that humans, again, can focus on the meaningful, tapping into more of our right brain, our interpersonal skills, our entrepreneurial skills to really create the workforce and the styles of jobs that we want, not just for this generation, but for future generations, so that people can actually feel the freedom and the liberty to tap into their own creative genius. Because I do think that creative genius times AI is what's going to position individuals well for the future.